Record.
Oh, it says got it.
You're on.
All right. Thank you, Deirdre. This has been very fun for me, and I hope for other people. And I am going to read quite a few stories today. They're not terribly short, but anyway, I'm going to read about Hugo Glassburn, for those of you who know people in the Valley. A story about the Twisp Mercantile, and then one about Kit McLean. And that's an interesting story about her working at Longacres
Racetrack.
which is a racetrack, one of the biggest racetracks in the Northwest. And Dee Goodsell and Patty Doran cooking blind. And one about Alfie Clark, and about a parking meter in Mansfield. And last but not least is writing your own obituary. So we will begin with Hugo Glassburn. Hugo Glassburn is spreading the word, and the word is Methow. Painted in capital letters across the sides of his 10 planes, the word is flown every day to Boise and Los Angeles and Portland and Salt Lake City. Hugo, the man behind a company called Methow Aviation Incorporated, responds when controllers in their radio towers radio their instructions. You are cleared to land, Methow 607. And he lowers the flaps in his old DC-3 and homes in on the runway. Back a few years ago, Hugo had a reputation in the Valley as a daredevil of the local skies. He'd fly upside down over Sun Mountain Lodge, perform rolls over Winthrop, scare the tar out of farmers as he put his Piper Cub into spins over alfalfa fields. But that was years ago. Right side up freight hauling is about all I do now, Hugo commented recently. It's not terribly exciting. I forgot to tell you that I wrote this for the Methow Valley News, November 14th, 1985. Starting in 1976, he flew a couple of Cessna 182s for the Forest Service, scouting fires in these mountains. Now Hugo is big time, employs 16 pilots in the summertime, about half that in the winter, has a maintenance facility in Everett where 7 full-time mechanics work on his DC-3s, Beech 18s, a Beech 99, and a couple of Cessnas. Hugo is a freighter of the skies. He hauls Wall Street journals from Seattle to Boise and packages from Burlington Northern, Pony Express, and the Flying Tiger. Freight in his hold may be tractor parks, salmon, US mail, or smoke jumpers, or it could be a little box, which has to be protected by 2 Air Force guards. The package could be secret papers, I guess, he says. When a fun-loving Hugo tries to prod the tight-lipped escorts about the contents, he's sometimes told, "You don't want to know." Hugo grew up in planes. Hanging on a wall in his Chihuahua home is a snapshot of him at 4 or 5 playing with his airplane, a toy made of a barrel and wagon wheels. His father was a pilot, so Hugo says he's been in planes as long as he can remember. He bought his first plane in 1956 just for fun, was an air crewman in the Navy, and afterwards he got into performing acrobatics at air shows and waxing his planes up for racing. But these days he's quit most of the funny stuff. While flying for the Forest Service, he thought he'd try charter flights, but he got tired of waiting for business. Besides, monthly payments on a Beech 99 run something like $16,000. So to cover the expenses, he started getting freight contracts. That's how Methow Aviation grew, and that's how it keeps growing. after 10,000 years, sorry, after 10,000 hours of flying, and here Hugo punches a few numbers into a wrist calculator, that's 416 days of straight flying. He still claims he likes riding along in the skies, looking out the window. Flying never ceases to fascinate me, he says, but sometimes he thinks of it as just a job, like when the weather's bad and all he can do is stare at his instruments. He states that the glorified image of a pilot in spotless uniform is far from the image that he casts. My job seems to be half pilot, half longshoreman. People should see a real working pilot, dirty and wet from the rain, unloading thousands of pounds of salmon or shifting 13,000 pounds of cargo within 5 hours. He says the name Methow does sometimes cause problems. Few people pronounce it right, Hugo says. But if you think about it, it's no worse than, say, Braniff. But Ajax would have been simpler. I once thought about naming it Fly by Night, since most of our flights take place at night. But changing the name is too hard, involves too much paperwork. Hugo's wife, Janet, has gotten telephone calls. Hello, is this Mrs. Methow? Or, pardon me, but what's a Methow? Whatever it is, the word is getting out. It's getting around from Yakutat, Alaska to LA, and Hugo's the man behind it all. Wonderful. I had a picture of Hugo here. There it is. That's a picture taken in Yakutat, Alaska, which I did not take.
Yeah, the owl of Methow.
There's the owl of Methow on his plane here. All right. I am going to read about the old twist mercantile. And I wrote this story for the Methow Valley News, January 17th, 1985. So we're talking 37 years ago. And 37 years ago, it was still a mercantile. It was like heaven to a kid. Penny candy in glass jars, pickles in barrels, cookies in boxes by the gross, shiny rolls of pretty hinges. At Christmas time, a big bowl of kidney beans in the window begged passersby to guess how many there were and win a prize. From gasoline to shoelaces, cement to underwear, gold pans to clocks, the twist mercantile, both before and after the Great Fire of 1924, was so well stocked, people never dreamed of Wenatchee shopping sprees. Nick Peters bought the original mercantile in 1915 from Grant Burke when the wooden building stood at the north end of Main Street where it hung over the bank of the Twist River. One summer night in 1924, the sky over Twist turned orange as the town went up in flames. The Merc, with its hardware and groceries, china and clothing, seeds and feed, was reduced to ashes, but not before Frank Terrio carried the 500-pound cash register out of the burning store and helped save one glass display case full of china and silver. Undaunted, the Peters family carried on a limited version of their business in a back room of what is now the Broken Spoke Tavern, which at that time held Cynthia Bailey's cafe, a barber shop, and a bank. In the meantime, the solid, indestructible brick and cement Merc was being built across the street where it is today. Nick Peters had married Sophie Terrio, who already had 8 children, and together they had 3 more, Bud, Audie, and Ann Rawdon. There was never a shortage of help at the store. Annie, now 75, lives in a house not 50 yards from the original Merc site. Her father had enticed Annie back from a good job in Seattle, offering her more pay and promising a more active social life. One time she told him, "This week, I don't want to be paid. I just want that nightgown," pointing to a lovely garment on display. The new Merc, if anything, was bigger and better stocked. There was a gas pump outside, farm machinery in the building next door, and the meat case was filled with meat cut downstairs, and shiny new scoops waited in bins of macaroni, rice, and dried beans. Shelves danced with canned vegetables from the Oroville cannery. They had the best canned tomatoes, said Annie. With Del Monte fruit and Reliance coffee, Smith Samsonite suitcases and Munsingwear underclothes. Black Bear jackets and pants were stacked neatly. Crisp smelling overalls sold for $1.19, unless they were on sale for 98 cents. A loaf of bread was a dime. Annie remembers Amy Austin and her brothers coming in clutching their nickel, looking around expectantly for a particular Terrio or Peters they thought gave more candy for their money. When cash was hard to come by, people paid in firewood or eggs. Firewood was always appreciated since the store furnace devoured 30 cords a winter. Besides employing many Valley people over the years, Nick himself worked at the store until he was 80. Bud worked there for 40 years, Audie for 22, and Annie for several years on and off. Al Hass was a partner. Stores like the old Merc are no more, not just because overalls cost 20 times more and it's no fun paying a quarter for a gumdrop, but because there's too much cellophane and plastic and too much self-service and not enough. Well, what can we offer you today, Molly? A pound of lentils, an apron, a sack of oats for the horse, this wash tub, that blanket? Oh, really? A hay rake, you say? Well, that's just fine. We've got just what you need. All righty. And moving on to, here is Kit McLean. And today in the audience, we have Kit's mother and two sisters. Now I wrote this one for the Wenatchee World on August 4th, 1987, which if you count it up is 35 years ago. And what's interesting is, I'll tell you now, that Kit is still working with horses today. And well, a little later. "7 a.m. The low sky hangs in tatters over Renton, gray as an unwashed dish rag, while cars on unseen freeways cast a pall of sound over the new day. But no one at the back barn area of Longacres pays any attention to such details. All concentration is focused elsewhere. Men and a scattering of women stand peering down the track, clutching plastic cups of coffee and stopwatches. Every thumb is cocked. These are the trainers. Longacres is their bailiwick, race horses, their gig, and speed, the name of the game. Kit McLean, 1979 graduate of Liberty Bell High School, works for 30 of these trainers. A pony girl, Kit is in demand owing to her competence and dependability. By this hour, she's already exercised at least 2 racehorses on the training track, and she has 3 more hours to figure out how to get all of her horses out. It is kind of a jigsaw puzzle, she said, of her formidable schedule. For several hours in the morning, 7 days a week, the stable areas of the Northwest's busiest racetrack hums with equine electricity. Between the rows of 1,600 stables, horses in 3s and 4s cool down in mechanical circles or are tethered to hot walkers. Others, muddy from their morning runs, are being hosed down. Everywhere you look, people are busy. Grooms muck stables, pony people and gallopers ride to and from the tracks. Jockeys, mounted and dismounted, look as high-strung as their steeds. Jockey agents calculate how to weasel their guys into the next race. For many there, Long Acres is home. The 200 acres a few miles south of downtown Seattle, ringed with freeways, is its own community, shops and restaurants, a dentist, doctors, blacksmiths, even a chaplain. But above all, horses tie these people together. The grandstand across from the barns can hold 17,500 people who can watch 10 races a day, 5 days a week, from April to October, and pump $1 million a day into gambling coffers. In a tiny clapboard house across the road from the back gate lives Kit McLean, Methow Valley native, who has made a living for herself in that domain for 3 years. On a typical day, she'll hit the snooze alarm 5 times before leaping from bed by 6. She throws on her grubbies, heads out the door, ducks under barbed wire, saddles up 2 of her 5 working horses, and leads them past the sentry posted to spot intruders. Within minutes, Kit, mounted on her own horse and holding onto the thin line that connects her to 1,000 pounds of racehorse, is pounding around the 3/8 mile track 2.5 times. After 2 horses, she switches to her rested horse and proceeds with her morning duties. Even though accidents happen, Kit feels strong and fit and credits 90% of her ability to her own fast, stupid, dependable ponies. She then scans the morning printout to find out which horses are running in the afternoon races. If she discovers she has more than 1 horse to warm up, she has to find someone else to help her. At 3:30 p.m., she's at the gap, which is the back stretch's entrance to the stables. She's on a different horse, dressed in slightly fresher clothes, and ready to lead whichever of her horses are racing across the 40-acre infield to the saddling area beside the grandstands. Once the horse is saddled and the jockeys on board, Kit leads them onto the track for a short warm-up and viewing by the crowd. By 9:30 p.m., the last race is over and Kit can slap the rump of her mount as she lets it back into her pasture for the night. Kit's always had a thing for horses. Her first was a $15 burro named Zeus, which she'd ride around the Methow Valley hills around her house. She still remembers the intense emotion that she felt and experienced on first encountering Valley packer Claude Miller and his pack string high in the mountains. When Kit was a junior in high school, Claude asked her to wrangle for him on one of his summer trips. She proved herself so well, Claude hired her steadily for several summer and hunting seasons. "I was ecstatic," said Kit. I've never been a woman's libber who felt I had to elbow people out of the way to prove myself. I just liked my work and I felt real capable. I was trusted. Somewhere along the line, the romance of horses wore off. Since it's hard to make a living in the Methow Valley, which she misses, Kit stays put at Long Acres largely for the money. It's not like in Winthrop where we always did things for people for nothing. Here, people pay you for every little thing you do, and you get used to charging them for it. If one of the horses I exercise wins, I often get tipped. The fact is, tips make you loyal. Despite all she's earned and learned at the racetrack, Long Acres is not in Kit's blood to stay. I miss the hills of home a lot, she said. I feel a real sense of peace there. There's real pressure here. It's hectic 7 days a week. Some of the people here, they don't understand that you can ride up a trail on a horse or even forget horses for a few minutes. There are moments that come frequently when Kit, surrounded by the hectic goings on around the back barns, dreams of sitting on her mother's porch on the high hill overlooking the Chewuk River and watching a rainstorm approach from the north. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Sheila and Lois and Heather, you want to say anything?
I want to say thank you.
Thanks, yes.
It was fun.
It was fun to go back to the beginnings.
Yes, yes, because even today she's probably working for Claude, right?
Well, she's out feeding horses. That's what she's doing right now. They have about 100 head, so takes a lot of
She
care.
has- That's amazing, yeah.
I may have actually really retired, so she's sort of the head of things these days.
Yeah, she's ahead. She took over from Claude Miller. So
Right.
she and Claude, after that first exciting sighting up in the mountains, 44 years later, 45 years later, here she is. Quite amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. This next story is about Dee Goodsoul and Patty Doran. I guess that's not where we're going. There we are. And I wrote it for the Wenatchee World, November 15th, 1988. 8 years ago, Dee Goodsoul contracted temporal arteritis, a disease which left her totally blind in the left eye and almost completely blind in the right. 6 years ago, Patty Doran sustained a severe frontal lobe injury in a car accident, which severed her left optic nerve and damaged her right one, leaving her legally blind. Last week, they made perfect date nut bread together. For the last couple of months, Dee, 71, and Patty, 40, have been meeting once a week in Dee's Twisp home to cook. Together, they have concocted coffee bars and pot roasts, muffins, and barbecued spare ribs. Dee is giving Patty the kind of instruction she'd be getting if she were in a school for the blind, said Barbara Doran, Patty's mother. Because of Patty's double deficit of blindness and problems from the head injury, she has not yet been accepted at a school. The day of the date nut bread, Dee asked Patty to wear a nightshade to block out any residual vision in order to force her to rely solely on her tactile sense, so that in the long run, she would be able to function effectively in any light condition. Cooking without looking is time consuming and often frustrating, but always a sensual experience. All ingredients must be handled several times. With fingers, ingredients are guided into measuring spoons, patted into measuring cups, felt as they pour into mixing bowls. They often wash their hands throughout the hour, cleaning off the butter, the flour, the stickiness of dates. Organizing is essential. Canisters of sugar and flour, the nest of measuring spoons, the knives, all have to be placed on a tray beside the marble cutting board. The tray catches spills besides serving as the focal point of objects being used. At one point, Patty swore when her hand encountered butter. Can't you hear her? But when she hadn't expected to. That's the sort of thing that reminds you to put things away when you've finished with them, Dee told Patty. She added that spilling things is just a fact of life in blind cooking. Knowing exactly where the edges of bowls and cups are takes serious concentration. I once emptied a whole can of fruit beside a bowl, Dee explained. Dee's guide dog Teak intruded himself into the small room a couple of times until Dee had to banish him to a less dangerous corner where he wouldn't trip the cooks. Adept in her own kitchen, Dee nonetheless allowed Patty to do almost all the preparations. Patty balked, however, at measuring out a teaspoon of vanilla. So Dee performed the tricky act, explaining as she worked. Holding the bottle of vanilla in her right hand, she placed her right index finger over the opening of the bottle to feel when the liquid poured out. Her left hand held the teaspoon with her left index finger in the bowl of the spoon to feel the vanilla filling. As the liquid rose, her finger moved up to the lip of the spoon to calculate when the vanilla reached the top. She then relocated the mixing bowl, reestablished where its edges were, and poured in the vanilla. The same process held true for boiling water, another of the ingredients. Despite constant and abusive use, Dee's left index finger is still heat sensitive. As Dee rewound the tape-recorded recipe to listen to it for the 7th time, the two cooks determined they'd put everything together. Patty mixed the dry ingredients with the wet ones and felt the mixture as it poured into the greased and floured pan. She slipped it into the oven, set the timer, alerted her olfactory sense for burning or readiness, and headed into the den for some Braille instructions with Dee. Patty enjoys Braille about as much as she enjoys sticking her hand by mistake into butter. I've gotten to H, she groused, and that stands for hell. But in a fast 40 minutes, the date nut bread was done perfectly. And that was when they got to indulge their sense of taste.
That was fabulous.
All righty. I don't have a picture of the next person coming up. And maybe none of us knew Alfie Clark too well because he had moved out of the valley fairly early. Okay, Alfie Clark, Buckaroo, from the Methow Valley News, November 15th, 1984. Alfie Clark, who still has the teeth the good Lord gave him, though his hair's thinning up, is a retired buckaroo. He says the word buckaroo like this, buckaroo, with the accent on the A, like they used to say it in Nevada.
Yeah.
Nope, in Nevada,
Oops.
where he was never out of the saddle from dawn till dark. Alfie just turned 86. Recently, his daughter talked him out of his last horse. I don't like to be without a horse, he griped. I've got plenty of hay and pasture, he mused almost to himself, picturing the 40 acres of sage and grass and hills near Malott where he lives with his wife, Cecile. I'll just have to get one at the next sale, he muttered under his breath, hoping she wouldn't hear him. After all, on the back of a horse with the wind in his face and the dust kicked up from hooves is where he feels most at home. Cecile was born a garrison up the Twist River. Her family is part of the nearly forgotten past of the valley. Her father worked in the post office in Silver, one of the valley's first settled outposts, which got washed away in an early flood. Only a sign in a field a few miles south of Twist marks that short-lived town today. Like Alfie, Cecile does not much care to visit the Methow Valley anymore. It's too spooky, she said. All those people up there are dead. There are too many memories. Sitting near their wood burner last week, Alfie and Cecile threw old names around, played them back and forth. Up the Twist River, every other one was a Libby, Alfie embroidered. In their mind's eye, they saw Cliff Libby and Ole Scott, both good old boys, both gone now, and many others, all gone. Living a long time often means you outlive your friends and family, but that doesn't seem to bother Alfie, who says he wouldn't mind living to the biblical age of 120. Alfie talked about the early 1920s when he was making $50 a month, moving thousands of head of cattle across wide open miles between Oregon and Nevada. After a huge breakfast from the buckaroo wagon, you'd just saddle up and head out where the boss told you, he said. One day in 1926, Alfie and his brother Jake meandered into the Methow Valley, intent on currying some gold from the rivers and the hills. There was color all up and down the river, he said. And when they headed into the Pasayten to prospect, it came clear to them it was not in their cards to strike it rich. So Alfie took jobs in what he knew best, cowboying on ranches, for Frank Thurlow and for Ferd Lehman and Hector Lamont. He packed into the hills for sheep herders and eventually amassed herds of cattle and sheep of his own up Texas Creek. The few pennies I have today I made in sheep, he admitted. He shipped lambs as far as Minnesota and once even traveled that distance with them and left me at home with 500 head, snipped Cecile from her corner.
You're dead.
In the early 1940s, Alfie met Cecile. She moved in on me and I couldn't get away, he bantered. He's an angel with horns, she said in a low voice so he wouldn't hear. She sticks around pretty good, he went on as if she hadn't said anything. They sold their place south of Carlton 16 years ago and settled in Malott. For the last 15 years, they have raised a grandson. 3 of their 4 children have died.
Jesus.
I left the Methow because I didn't have any sense, I guess, Alfie admitted. The Methow is home to me. Unlike Cecile, I like to go over and visit. Alfie, 86, retired buckaroo, wants to live a long time to come so he can keep on learning. And besides, there's a lot of kick in him yet. Just ask Cecile. That's Alfie. And nature. Okay.
That's great.
I'll be with you in a second here. I think.
No worries. We'll do a commercial.
Okay. I wrote this for the Wenatchee World in May 12th, 1992. And funnily enough, I heard from people back east that it had been picked up by the AP for some reason.
You'll find out why.
You'll find out why. Let's see. I have a picture of,
Nationwide, spread nationwide.
right. There we go. Nobody likes a parking meter except the people in Mansfield. Now, for those of you who don't live here, Mansfield is it's on a high plateau about an hour and a half from here. It's just one of those towns in the middle of this wide expanse. Okay, nobody likes a parking meter except the people of Mansfield. Mid-Douglas County, this prairie town of 350 people has a business section 1 block long. Stand in the middle of Main Street, look both ways, and you can see city limits, which is rolling sagebrush and wheat fields that slam up against the sky about where the earth curves. The only working parking meter in all of north central Washington resides in downtown Mansfield. But hey, it's only a penny, nickel, dime type, a real bargain. 10 cents is worth 2 hours of parking time. But visitors beware, it floats. Not by itself, mind you. The mayor himself moves it, or one of his boys, or sometimes townspeople playing a prank on one another. Its round steel base makes rolling it from one spot to spot a manageable task. One day, the mobile meter might be in front of City Hall. Another day outside the Golden Wheat Cafe or Bayless Food Store. Since it's not on the way to anywhere in particular, Mansfield doesn't get a whole lot of outside traffic. At noon, farmers and city employees come in for lunch at the cafe or at Lydia Gull's town tab. That's when several cars at once park on Main Street. That's when it's possible to see that people not in the know tend to avoid the parking meter. Look around and you'll see the only gap is where the meter is, grinned Mayor Tom Snell. People sometimes pull in to park, see it, and pull out again and go park across the street. Other times you'll watch kids lean their bikes up against it and pump it full of pennies. Last year, the meter earned the town $22. The mayor took that stash to buy prizes for Play Day, Mansfield's annual festival, which takes place the second Saturday of June. Some fluorescent orange tickets have been made up saying this vehicle is illegally parked, just for an extra joke, Snell said. Other tickets thank the owner for contributing to Play Day prize money. Last year was the meter's debut in Mansfield. Snell had spied it at a swap meet. It had originally been immovable in Goldendale until Goldendale got smart and he yanked out all of them. A bunch had ended up at a swap meet. Snell says he doesn't really have to move it very often. It makes its own way around town, said Lynn Nichols of the Golden Wheat Inn. People move it when they want to play a joke on someone. A guy will come into town to eat and someone else will go and place it in front of his car, said Lydia Bayless of Bayless Trustworthy Hardware. One day when an ex-county commissioner was lunching at the Lions Club, the meter was rolled up beside his car. When he came out, he had a ticket. He thought it was great, Snell recalled. He dug into his pockets and came up with 2 nickels. The movable meter graces Main Street from about March until Play Day. The pennies add up slowly. But no one minds this nickel and diming. Sure, someone could whip out his checkbook and dash off a check for $22 and give it to the Play Day committee. But what fun would that be?
That's a great.
Is it still there?
Last time I was there, I think it was there. It just moves around. All right. I'll come back to myself here. My sister Wendy has told me last time we talked, which was what, 2 days ago, that she was going to write her own obituary. So I suddenly came across this that I wrote for the Methow Valley News in January 24th, 1985. It was entitled "Write Your Own Obituary or Someone Else Will." At the risk of sounding morbid, I would like to propose a fun indoor project for this long gray winter, writing your own obituary. Don't get me wrong, I mean this seriously, well, mostly. It could, if you let it, be entertaining. The point would be to make it interesting, lively, something that would stick in people's memories. If you don't write it, someone else will, And then you'll end up sounding like you were like everybody else, and you weren't. You know you weren't. Even if it gets out of hand somehow, and it never gets into the Methow Valley News or the New York Times or whatever, you might get to have some insights about yourself in the trying. Not knowing when the masterpiece might be needed should not be a problem, except to say you should get on this project right away, just in case. Then, as the years roll by and you feel inclined, you can revisit it, reconsider it, add a paragraph or two, delete whole sections. My father, who is still kicking, wrote his own obituary about 8 years ago so that it would be done right. He put in everything he wanted everyone to know about him. Obviously, he left out a lot. I have a copy of it in my closet. My sisters have their copies. And so when his eventual end surprises us, one of us will send it to the indicated newspapers. I'm glad he did it. None of us could have pulled it off. I wrote mine one night this winter. Perhaps if I share a few sentences from it, you might be inspired to have a go at your own. DH keeled over Tuesday, just as abrupt in death as she was in life, I began. Well, of course, that's just wishful thinking about my keeling over, but that can be rectified by whoever has the task of looking the thing over. She belonged to no clubs, had no children, leaves one disheartened husband at the home on the Twist River. No clubs and no children is correct. The rest will have to be rewritten if it doesn't fit the facts. She attended Catholic schools dressed in uniforms, thus her atrocious taste in clothes. She was prey to childhood scruples for silly little sins like leaving bread crusts on her plate. Generally, she didn't like to eat and for years was called Skinny Malinky Lou until she got married. She married young, stayed married, and liked it. Theirs was one of the good ones. She and he traveled extensively, and if she ever excelled in anything in particular, it was traveling, though eventually Twisp became far more interesting to her than even Timbuktu. Some sort of conclusion, even though you're not yet concluded, could be something like her ashes were scattered to the wind, easy come, easy go, or whatever. Remember, you can always edit the thing. On this excursion to your inner self, I bid you bon voyage. Thank you.
Did you write that?
Did I write that? Yes, I wrote
Yeah.
that.
Okay, I missed it. I missed who wrote it, but I was the whole time I'm thinking that's got to be Diana. She.
Yeah.